So it's the end of the pool season, and it's time to do some preventive repair and maintenance to our pool systems. This is our StaRite 1 horsepower pool pump. By the end of the pool season, the pump was making an extreme amount of noise. The bearings were absolutely screaming. It was so loud. So now that it's over, I pulled the pump out, and you can watch along as I disassemble this. Pull the bearings out, put new ones in, put it back together again, and get this pump working perfectly for next pool season. To begin the disassembly process, we're going to remove this portion of the pump, this strainer basket, and this front part of the impeller housing. There are 4 stainless steel bolts and nuts on here, and we're going to remove those. We'll go ahead and separate the strainer, set that aside. The next step is to remove the back of this. Got to remove this center switch right here. This is the pump impeller. It needs to be spun off counterclockwise. The way to do that is to take a 7/16 inch wrench. You put it on the back of the pump shaft itself and spin the impeller off counterclockwise. So the whole assembly should come off as one piece. The next thing to come off is this part of the centrifugal switch. There's 2 springs. The springs need to come off here. Just use a pair of needle nose pliers, pull them off. I got that part. Spread these wings out here. We can pull out this piece here. The next thing I need to do is remove the motor shaft and the stator from the motor casing itself, and we're going to do that by tapping on the end of the motor shaft here to push it out. So you can see those 2 taps of the hammer help to separate the motor ends from the motor casing. One thing you want to ensure is that this wave washer comes out and that you reinstall it correctly when you reassemble the motor casing. Here's the stator I've removed from the motor. Here is the rear bearing, and this is obviously the front of the motor, and there is a bearing just behind this portion of the plate right here. To access that, we're going to have to put this screw right here. There is a clip behind here. It's difficult to see. We have to make sure that we keep this clip and we orient it correctly. It has a tang on it that keeps it from spinning. Next, we want to remove this rubber cap or protective sleeve. You can gently spin it and pull it out. The next step is to remove this cover plate. So you can tap it. And there we go. The next thing to do is there is a circlip on here. I'm going to need to remove that circlip before I go ahead and attempt to pull this bearing off. Here I have the puller attached to the shaft and hooked underneath the bearing. Here's the fending bearing. All right, let's start the process to remove the bottom bearing. I'm just going to take some 400 grit sandpaper and smooth out and eliminate all the rust. Now you can see just how clean the surface is after I've cleaned it up with the sandpaper. Same thing on this side too. This is the old bearing and this is the new bearing that just came in. I've mounted the motor armature firmly in a vise, and I have coated the bearing surface with a light coating of grease to help the installation process. Using a 3/4 inch deep socket to use as my tapping block. Bearing is level and straight. Bearing is now fully seated on the motor shaft. All right, let's prep the motor shaft here on the opposite end. We'll get a little bit of a grease coating on here, just a light coating. I put some electrical tape on the edge just to help protect the bearing surface as I tapped it in place. All right, the bearing is now fully seated against the stop on the motor shaft and is ready for reinstallation into the motor. Before we reinsert the motor armature back into the motor, insert this wave washer into the back of the bearing housing. All right, it's time to reinstall the armature back into the motor housing. Going to go ahead and put a light coat of grease on this bearing, actually on both bearings. All right, let's go ahead and reinstall the circlip on here. All right, the next step is to install the front plate or the front motor cap onto the motor body itself. I've gone ahead and installed this keeper right here. I have my registration marks right here. All right, here we got the back of the motor here. I'm gonna push these through, these long bolts. Registration mark is right there. Got the second one here started. Oh, there we go, the second one. Let's get bolt number 3 installed. Okay. And now lastly, bolt number 4. In preparation to get the front pump section reconnected. To do that, let's get this tightened. Insert this rubber gasket more or less. Helps prevent water from entering the motor housing or hitting the front of the bearing. And the last one over here. There we go. All right, let's reinstall a portion of the centrifugal switch. This part of the switch needs to go into the body of the switch right here. Go ahead and grab the rear hook. Shut off switch. Operates correctly. The last piece, the cover. So the rebuilding process is complete. I have the front portion of the pump on. I put on the rear portion of the rear protective cover of the pump. It's plugged in. All right, here's a moment of truth. We're going to try and turn this on and see how it sounds. My goodness, that is exactly how the pump sounded when it was brand new.